My God, how can this be happening now? The voice of David Wellington, a sound usually calibrated to the cool, confident tones of command, was a raw, strangled thing. It echoed off the floor-to-ceiling glass of his 45th floor office, a frantic crack in the serene, minimalist perfection of his corporate kingdom. He paced back and forth on the polished Italian marble, a caged lion in a $5,000 suit, his hand clutching a smartphone so tightly his knuckles were white. Through the huge windows, he could see them. 3 sleek, black sedans, gliding to a silent stop at the grand entrance of the Wellington Industries Tower. The Chinese delegation, they were early. Rebecca, tell me you have something, he snarled into the phone, his eyes fixed on the figures emerging from the cars below. Anything, a student, a tourist, someone who took a high school Mandarin class, I don't care. I need a translator. Now, the official, certified and astronomically expensive translator for the most important meeting of his career had just called to cancel a last-minute family emergency. A burst appendix, an act of God that was about to cost him $200 million. In 15 minutes, the executives from China's largest and most powerful technology conglomerate, a company known for its ruthless efficiency and its strict adherence to protocol, would be sitting in his conference room. They were here to finalize a deal, a partnership that would not only save his company from a looming financial crisis, but would catapult Wellington Industries into the global stratosphere. And it all depended on perfect, flawless, and culturally nuanced communication. A translation app or, God forbid, improvised gestures would be seen as an unforgivable insult. They would walk, the deal would die, and his company, his legacy, would likely die with it. Mr. Wellington, I've tried every service in the city. The voice of his executive assistant, Rebecca, crackled back, tight with panic. The consulate, the universities, every private firm. No one is available for a meeting of this magnitude on such short notice. It's impossible. David loosened his Italian silk tie, a desperate, futile gesture. He could feel a bead of sweat trace a cold path down his temple. 20 years he had spent building Wellington Industries from a small, family-owned business into a global powerhouse, and it could all come crashing down because of a burst appendix and a language barrier. It was then that a third voice, soft and almost impossibly quiet, spoke from the corner of the room. Excuse me, Mr. Wellington, but I speak fluent Mandarin. Every head in the room, David's, Rebecca's, on the speakerphone, and 2 junior executives who were frozen in a state of terrified paralysis, turned, standing by the door, a cleaning cloth in her hand and a rolling cart of supplies beside her, was Jasmine Parker. She was 28 years old, and for the past 3 years she had been a ghost in this building. She was the woman who silently emptied their trash cans in the dead of night, who wiped down their conference tables after their important meetings, who polished the glass walls of their ivory tower until they were as invisible as she was a part of the building's machinery, as functional and as overlooked as the air conditioning system that hummed quietly above their heads. The silence that followed her statement was so deep, so profound, that you could hear the frantic, terrified thumping of David's own heart. Rebecca was the first to react, her voice a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter over the speakerphone. Jasmine, for God's sake, this is not the time for jokes. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar international deal. David studied her, really looked at her as if for the first time. He saw a young black woman, her hair pulled back in a neat, practical bun, her eyes dark, intelligent, and unnervingly calm. There was a quiet dignity in her posture, a stillness that was a stark, jarring contrast to the frantic, high-stakes panic that was consuming him. You speak Mandarin? He asked, his voice heavy with a skepticism that was warring with a rising, desperate hope. Mandarin, Cantonese, and a little Taiwanese. Jasmine replied, her voice steady, her gaze meeting his without a trace of fear or deference. I studied Oriental linguistics at Howard University before I started working here. Jasmine had never imagined this moment. She had played out 1,000 different scenarios for how her life might change, but none of them involved a high-stakes international negotiation and a desperate billionaire CEO for 3 years. She had cleaned these offices, a silent witness to the machinations of power. She had listened to their conversations while wiping down their desks, absorbed their strategies while polishing their windows, watched their moves while emptying their trash. She knew the secret, beating heart of this company better than many of the executives who strode through its halls. She knew their weaknesses, their vanities, their secrets, especially Rebecca's. Rebecca's voice, now sharp with irritation, crackled over the phone again. David, You cannot be seriously considering this. A cleaning lady, conducting the most important meeting of the year. What will the Chinese think? It's professional suicide. At that moment, a memory, sharp and clear as a shard of glass, flashed through Jasmine's mind. It was from 6 months ago. She had been cleaning the executive restroom, a sanctuary of marble and gold fixtures. Rebecca had come in, crying, talking furiously on her phone. I don't care if she has a degree. Rebecca had sobbed to the person on the other end. I will not have that. That black girl hanging around the important meetings. Find a reason. Any reason. I want her gone. At the time, Jasmine had frozen in the stall, making herself invisible, her heart pounding. But she had remembered every single word. For a long moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, David Wellington stared at Jasmine. He saw the quiet confidence in her eyes, the deep, unnerving intelligence that lay just beneath the surface of her calm demeanor. For 3 years, he had looked right through her, seeing only a uniform, a function, a ghost. Now, in his moment of absolute desperation, he was finally, truly, seeing the person. Prove it, he said abruptly. A command born of a last, desperate gamble. Say something in Mandarin. Something a translator would say. Jasmine took a deep breath, and then she spoke. Her voice, no longer a quiet murmur, filled the silent office. It was a different voice, a voice of fluid, tonal perfection, of impeccable, confident pronunciation. It was the voice of a scholar, of a diplomat. Wmen hun rongxing neng zai jala jian dao nin, Wmen zikwang Wmen de hezuo neng dai lai hulk gongying dijig. David was speechless. He didn't understand a single word, but he understood the language of authority. He understood the sound of competence. And what he had just heard was the sound of someone who was not just fluent, but masterful. Did you say? He asked, his mind still reeling. It is a great honor to meet with you here, and we hope that our cooperation will bring mutually beneficial results. Jasmine translated, her voice switching back to its quiet, professional English. It's a standard, respectful business greeting in formal Chinese culture. It establishes a tone of mutual respect and shared purpose. Rebecca on the phone was practically shrieking now. David, think about the optics. What will our clients think when they see you bringing a cleaning lady into an executive negotiation? But David was no longer listening to Rebecca. He was looking at Jasmine, at the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her, at the deep, calm intelligence in her eyes. He was a man who had built his empire on calculated risks, on trusting his gut when the data was inconclusive, and his gut, at this moment, was screaming at him. You have 20 minutes, he said finally, his voice once again the voice of a CEO making a command decision. He ignored Rebecca's shocked gasp on the other end of the line. Find something appropriate to wear, borrow something from the receptionist if you have to, and meet me in the main conference room. As Jasmine hurried out of the office, her mind already shifting gears, processing, preparing, Rebecca's furious whisper followed her down the hall. You have completely lost your mind, David. When this backfires, when you humiliate this company, in front of the most important clients we have ever had, it will be the end of your career. But David wasn't listening. For the first time in years, he felt a surge of something other than the cold, hard calculus of business. It was a flicker of hope, of intrigue, of the thrilling, terrifying possibility that the most valuable assets in his company were not the ones listed on his balance sheet, but the ones who had been hiding in plain sight all along. What none of them knew, what no one in that building could possibly have imagined, was that Jasmine Parker had been preparing for this moment for her entire life, and Rebecca, in her arrogance, in her petty, thinly veiled prejudice, was about to discover that underestimating someone based on their uniform is the single most expensive, most catastrophic mistake a person can make. 20 minutes later, when Jasmine Parker walked into the main conference room, the silence that fell was immediate, profound, and deeply, deeply awkward. She had traded her navy blue cleaning uniform for a simple, elegant black pantsuit, borrowed from the surprisingly helpful and sympathetic receptionist on the executive floor. It was a size too big, but she had cinched the waist with a belt from her own locker, and the effect was one of understated, professional competence. Her hair, which she usually wore in a practical, tight bun, was now pulled back in a sleek, elegant chignon. She carried a leather-bound notepad and a pen. She was transformed. Jesus Christ, muttered Thomas, the company's CFO, a man who had never once made eye contact with her in 3 years. Is that really the same person? Rebecca, who was now seated at the conference table, her face a mask of furious resentment, didn't bother to lower her voice. You can put a jewel in a lump of coal. she whispered venomously to the executive assistant seated next to her, but it's still just a piece of coal on the inside. The Chinese delegation had arrived, punctual to the second. 5 impeccably dressed executives, their faces calm and unreadable, were seated on one side of the massive, polished mahogany table. They chatted quietly among themselves in Mandarin, their gazes occasionally drifting to the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. David, his own face a carefully composed mask of confidence, made the formal introductions. He deliberately, strategically, omitted Jasmine's current job title. "And this," he said, gesturing to Jasmine, his voice smooth and authoritative, "is Jasmine Parker, our international relations specialist for the Asian market." The leader of the Chinese delegation, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, named Mr. Chen, rose slightly and greeted Jasmine with a respectful bow. When she responded, not with a simple nod, but with a perfectly executed bow of her own, and then addressed him in flawless, formal Mandarin, thanking him for the honor of the meeting and praising their punctuality, a highly valued virtue in Chinese business culture. His eyes, which had been cool and appraising, lit up with a genuine, undisguised surprise and approval. For the first 15 minutes of the meeting, Jasmine was a ghost again, but a different kind of ghost. She was a seamless, invisible conduit of communication. She translated every nuance, every technical specification, every complex contractual clause with a surgical precision that was breathtaking. She didn't just translate the words, she translated the intent, the cultural subtext, the subtle, unspoken dance of a high-stakes negotiation. She even managed to translate a dry technical joke from one of the American engineers into a clever, culturally appropriate witticism that made the entire Chinese delegation laugh. A warm, genuine sound that instantly broke the tension in the room. The meeting was flowing with a naturalness, an ease, that no one, least of all David, had thought possible. It was then that Rebecca, who'd been sitting in stony, resentful silence, decided to intervene. "Jasmine," she interrupted, her voice, a sweet, poisonous honey, a malicious smile playing on her lips. "Perhaps we should take a moment to explain to our distinguished guests your unique career path here at our company." David shot her a look that could have frozen fire, a silent, furious warning, but Rebecca, blinded by her own jealousy, and her desperate need to reassert her place in the hierarchy, ignored him. "It's just so inspiring," she continued, her condescending tone unmistakable, "to see someone reinventing themselves like that, moving up in the world, so to speak." Jasmine felt a familiar cold weight settle in the pit of her stomach. It was the weight of 1,000 similar humiliations, 1,000 moments of being judged, dismissed, and defined by her circumstances. She thought of her mother, of the endless medical bills, of the crushing weight of student loan debt that had forced her to drop out of her master's program at Howard, a program where she had been the star pupil. She thought of the years she had spent cleaning the messes of people like Rebecca, all while her brilliant mind, her extraordinary talent, lay dormant, waiting. Life teaches us that opportunities can come in the most unexpected of ways, Jasmine replied, her voice a model of calm, her dignity a shield against Rebecca's venom. Mr. Chen, she noticed, was watching the exchange with a new, intense curiosity, his head tilted slightly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. But really, Rebecca pressed on, savoring her moment. Who would have thought that someone who was cleaning these very rooms just 3 years ago would now be sitting at this table, in a meeting of this importance? She paused, letting the information land with its intended, devastating impact. She was not just speaking to the room. She was speaking directly to the Chinese delegation. It really demonstrates how our company values diversity, in all its forms. The silence that followed was devastating. Jasmine saw Mr. Chen's expression change. The warmth, the approval was gone, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible coolness. It was not contempt, not exactly, it was a look of uncomfortable surprise, of a deep, cultural confusion. In the rigid, hierarchical world of Chinese business, what Rebecca had just done was not just an insult to Jasmine, it was an insult to the entire proceeding. It suggested a lack of seriousness, a lack of respect for the gravity of the negotiation. Quickly interjected, his voice tight with a barely controlled fury. "What Rebecca meant to say," he said, his eyes boring into his subordinate, "is that we value talent, wherever we may find it." But the damage was done. For the next 15 minutes, the atmosphere in the room was different. The easy flow of conversation was gone, replaced by a stilted, formal politeness. The Chinese executives were still professional, but a wall had gone up. Jasmine, in their eyes, had been transformed from a respected professional, a skilled linguist, into a curiosity, a mascot, a cleaning lady playing dress-up. That it was at that moment that something inside her, something that had been dormant for a very long time, finally crystallized. For 3 years, she had been a ghost. She had cleaned their offices, polished their tables, and listened. She had listened to their strategies, their deals, their mistakes. She had absorbed the secret beating heart of this company, especially Rebecca's secrets, the lies she told about quarterly sales figures to impress clients, the way she took credit for projects that were entirely developed by subordinates who were later restructured out of a job, the way she used confidential information, gleaned from her position, to sabotage competitors and advance her own career. Jasmine had seen everything. She had heard everything, and, most importantly, she had remembered everything. The meeting concluded with a tentative non-committal preliminary agreement. The Chinese delegation promised to carefully consider the proposal, which was diplomatic code for, "We will be exploring our other options." When the delegation had left, Rebecca couldn't hide her satisfaction. "Well," she said, arranging her papers with an exaggerated, self-important flourish, "that was interesting. Perhaps next time, we should be more transparent about our team's qualifications from the outset." David was visibly, incandescently furious, but before he could respond, Jasmine rose calmly from her chair. "Rebecca," she said, her voice soft, but laden with a new, strange authority that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. "Mr. Chen mentioned something interesting to me just before he left." Rebecca raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, really? And what might that be?" "He said he was very impressed with my linguistic fluency," Jasmine began, "but that he was confused by the hierarchical dynamics of our meeting." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "He asked if I might be able to call him later this evening to clarify some of the cultural aspects of our corporate structure. He said he would like to better understand our organization before making a final decision." Rebecca's face paled almost imperceptibly as she processed the implications. For 3 years Jasmine Parker had been invisible, but invisibility, she was about to discover, can be the most powerful weapon of all, especially when you have been watching and learning and preparing for the perfect moment to step out of the shadows. What Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that every insult, every humiliation, every pathetic attempt at sabotage, was not just fueling a simple resentment, it was forging a strategist who knew every weakness, every lie, every dirty little secret that circulated through the corridors of power. And that strategist was about to make her first move. The morning of the 4th day of the conference, the Grand Plaza Hotel was a symphony of controlled high-stakes chaos. Zoe Johnson moved through it all with a newfound, unshakable confidence. She was no longer a ghost in a grey uniform. She was the conductor of this complex, multilingual orchestra. Her initiatives, from the flawlessly translated welcome packets to her personal, culturally attuned interventions, had already resulted in preliminary contracts that exceeded all of Coleman's most optimistic projections. The Dutch and Chinese executives loved her. They sought her out, not just for translation, but for her insights, her advice, her innate understanding of the delicate dance of international business. As she walked through the lobby, she saw him. Thomas Whitmore, the director of operations, was leading a young woman toward the executive elevators. The woman looked nervous, out of her depth. She was clutching a folder marked Final Translation, Master Contract. "Miss Whitmore, your Mandarin translation is adequate," he was saying, his voice a low, controlled murmur. "There's no need for any further concern." Zoe recognized the last name instantly. Ashley Whitmore, his niece, the expert translator. A quick, surreptitious glance at the document in the young woman's hand as she passed confirmed her worst fears. The same critical, deal-breaking errors were still there, woven into the fabric of the most important contract of the entire conference. "Mr. Coleman needs to see this," Zoe thought, a cold resolve settling in her stomach. She turned and headed for the executive offices. Coleman was on the phone, his face a thundercloud, when she entered his office without knocking. He held up a finger, signaling her to wait, then finished his call with a clipped, angry command. "What is it, Zoe?" "Whitmore is actively trying to sabotage the final deal," she said, showing him the photo she had discreetly snapped of the flawed contract on her phone. "He's replacing my corrected translations with his niece's original, flawed versions, and I have proof that this has been going on for years." Coleman stood up abruptly, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "Are you absolutely sure?" I have everything documented, she confirmed. The inflated invoices, the fraudulent credentials, the trail of near disasters that have been quietly swept under the rug. As they spoke, Zoe Williams, her ally in HR, rushed into the office, her face pale. Mr. Coleman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I found something you need to see right away. She handed him a thick folder. Hiring records. For the last 5 years. It's a consistent, undeniable pattern of rejecting qualified non-white candidates, especially women, for any client-facing or management role. Coleman flipped through the documents, his face hardening with each page. The report from the outside consulting firm had hinted at something, but this was systematic. This was a disease. At that moment, as if summoned by the devil himself, Thomas Whitmore entered the office without knocking. Richard, he began, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. The Dutch are ready to sign, but they're asking about some minor inconsistencies in the translations. Johnson must have mixed something up. I'll handle it. The silence that followed was glacial. Coleman walked slowly to the door and closed it, the soft click echoing in the vast office like a gunshot. Thomas, he said, his voice dangerously, unnaturally calm. I am looking at payment records for $50,000 for a single, incompetent translation, while a Georgetown-educated linguist with 6 years of loyal service was cleaning my bathrooms. Do you have an explanation? Whitmore paled. I don't know what you're talking about. We hire the best. His niece, Thomas, Coleman interrupted, his voice a low growl. You hired your niece, who has a fraudulent certification from a university that has no record of her ever attending, Zoe finished, placing a printed email from Peking University. On the desk, Whitmore shot Zoe a look of pure, venomous hatred. You're a nobody, he hissed. A cleaning lady who got lucky, who thinks she can play with the big boys. A PhD in applied linguistics from Georgetown, with 6 internationally published academic articles, Zoe corrected him calmly, all of which have been in the HR files that you have lost repeatedly. Thomas, I've called an emergency board meeting, Coleman interjected, his voice like the crack of a whip. It's in 30 minutes. By then, I want your resignation letter. On my desk and hers, he added, nodding towards the door, a clear reference to Manager Richards. You can't be serious. Whitmore laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound, over her. Choose your next words with extreme care, Thomas, Coleman warned, his eyes like chips of ice. 2 hours later, the executive auditorium was packed. Every manager, supervisor, and director in the hotel had been summoned to an urgent all-hands meeting. In the front row, the delegations of Dutch and Chinese business executives sat, their expressions a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Manager Richards, looking pale and ill, sat near the back, a lone figure in a sea of corporate anxiety. Coleman took the stage, with Zoe at his side. Today, he began, his voice grave, we have discovered a systematic scheme of discrimination, nepotism, and corruption that has cost this company millions of dollars and has betrayed the very principles upon which we were founded. A presentation began on the massive screen behind him. It showed a devastating data-driven analysis of the hotel's hiring and promotion practices, comparative charts of employee qualifications versus their assigned roles, hiring and rejection statistics broken down by race and gender, a detailed accounting of the overpriced, fraudulent contracts that had been awarded to companies owned by the friends and family members of senior management. Miss Zoe Johnson, Coleman continued, his voice resonating with a new, profound respect, whom some of you have known for years only as a member of our housekeeping staff, single-handedly saved our company from a diplomatic and financial disaster this week. She did so by correcting incompetent and culturally offensive translations that would have cost this company millions of dollars in lost contracts and international goodwill. The Asian businessmen in the front row nodded in recognition. A few of them began to applaud, a quiet but powerful statement of support. As a result of an internal investigation, Coleman announced, his voice now hard as steel, Thomas Whitmore has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. Sarah Richards is suspended, pending the completion of our investigation into her role in this systemic failure. The room fell into a shocked, absolute silence. Richards stared at the floor, her face ashen, and finally, Coleman's face softened slightly as he turned to Zoe. I am pleased, and deeply honored, to announce that Dr. Zoe Johnson is being named as our new permanent Global Director of International Communications and Relations, overseeing all of our multilingual operations worldwide. The auditorium erupted. The applause was thunderous, a wave of genuine, cathartic celebration. The cleaning staff, who had been gathered at the back of the room, were cheering, some with tears of joy streaming down their faces. As she left the stage, Zoe saw Whitmore being escorted out of the building by security. His face was a mask of impotent rage. As he passed her, he muttered, "You won't last a month." Zoe just smiled serenely. In the pocket of her newly acquired blazer was a small, digital recording device, the same one that had captured every threat, every racist comment Whitmore had whispered to her over the past few days as he had desperately and foolishly tried to intimidate her into silence. That night, in her new sprawling office overlooking the glittering, endless city, Zoe finally allowed herself to cry. They were not tears of sadness, or of anger, or even of triumph. They were tears of a deep, profound, and long overdue catharsis. 6 years. 6 years of being invisible, of being denied, of having her potential dismissed and her dreams deferred. She picked up the phone and called her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to pay for her education. "I did it, Mum," she said simply, her voice breaking with the weight of it all. "I did it." What no one at the Grand Plaza Hotel could have predicted that day was that the real transformation was only just beginning. The fall of Whitmore and his discriminatory scheme was not an end. It was a beginning. It was the first chapter in a complete overhaul that would shake the foundations not only of that hotel but of the entire American hotel industry. And it all started with a simple phone call, in Dutch. 6 months had passed. The office on the 32nd floor now had a discreet, elegant plaque on the oak door. Dr. Zoe Johnson, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations. The position, and the division, had been created specifically for her by a humbled and deeply changed Richard Coleman. The Invisible Talents Program, Zoe's personal initiative to identify and promote qualified employees who had been systematically overlooked, had become the new industry standard. In just 6 months, they had identified and promoted 147 employees, bellmen who were self-taught coders, kitchen porters who were financial wizards, maids who were brilliant logisticians. 83% of them were people of color. The company's profits had soared, and their international customer satisfaction ratings were the highest in the industry. Thomas Whitmore, after his public disgrace, had found it impossible to get another executive position. The last Zoe had heard, he was managing a roadside motel in Arizona. His niece, Ashley, had been forced to return the money she had fraudulently earned and was now, ironically, studying Mandarin with a scholarship from the new Coleman Foundation for Inclusive Language Education. Sarah Richards, after a long and painful investigation, had accepted a demotion and a transfer. She was now managing the laundry service at a second-tier hotel in Fresno, a daily, grinding reminder of the consequences of her own petty prejudices. In closing her keynote address at the National Hospitality Conference, Zoe looked out at the sea of faces. "My mother," she said, her voice clear and strong, "worked as a maid in a hotel just like this one. She had a college degree, but she never got a job in her field. She always told me, Zoe, no matter how much they try to make you feel invisible, your worth is not dependent on their recognition." Her voice broke for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "My mother passed away believing that some doors would never open for people like us. She never lived to see this moment. She never lived to see that her sacrifice was worth it." Across the room, executives who had once seen diversity as a box to be ticked were wiping away tears. "The true power of a company," Zoe concluded, "isn't how much it makes, but the potential it unleashes." For decades, this industry, like so many others, buried extraordinary talent under service uniforms, assuming that people of certain colors, or certain accents, or certain backgrounds were only fit for invisible roles. Today, we know better. Today, we do better. The standing ovation was long and thunderous. Richard Coleman, sitting in the front row, applauded the loudest. The best revenge, Zoe had discovered, was not in watching her antagonists fall. It was in watching hundreds of people like her, people who had been told their whole lives that they were not enough, finally rise.